There's one rule for Don Harwin and another for the rest of us. Is that right?
Well, good morning, Laura. Look, it's obviously very disappointing, and we're asking people right across our state right now to make enormous sacrifices. We know it's tough, but we can't have a situation where it's do as I say, not as I do, and that's why, look, I think it's important that the minister's apologised and he's coming back home.
It's hard to take when people are copping $1,000 fines and there'll be no repercussions for him.
Look, that's a matter for the police, Laura. We've made it very clear to the people right across our state that we want you to stay at home, that we need to social distance at this time so that our community remains safe. It's going to be a challenging 6-month period. It's becoming cliched, but we're all in this together, and I think the government needs to lead by example. Is
there any good reason that he shouldn't be sacked this morning?
Look, that's above my pay grade, Laura. I've got enough on my plate running the state's economy and the New South Wales finance.
Fair enough, but this must be very frustrating to you when you're trying to get the message out there every day for people not to travel over Easter. You have the New South Wales Police Commissioner saying exactly the same thing, the Premier doing that, and here's one of your colleagues just ignoring what you have to say almost every day for 3 weeks.
Well, it's frustrating, it's very disappointing, and I think it's a time for all ministers and all members of the government to be leading by example. And we're asking people right across our state to make enormous sacrifices at this time, and I think we need to lead from the front.
But he won't be sacked?
Well, as I said, Lloyd, that's not a matter for me.
Should he be fined at the very least?
Well, that might be the case. I mean, that's a matter for what the Police Commissioner has said, and particularly over this Easter period, that we need people to stay at home, and if there's not a reasonable excuse for that, there's a fine associated with it. So that's a matter for the Police Commissioner and the police force here in our state. But what's most important right now is that there is a very clear message to everyone who's doing an amazing job. You spoke just on the lead-in about the numbers have dropped right across our state, and that's because everybody is socially distancing at this time and doing the right thing. And all ministers and members of parliament need to lead by example.
A good segue, Minister. I will take you up on that. You have stepped up the childcare funding today. Will this ensure that no preschools or community childcare centres will close?
Well, that's what we'd hope, and we've got this complicated system at the moment where the states are responsible for preschools and the federal government, Commonwealth, are responsible for childcare. So what we've announced today is that here in New South Wales, we cover the cost of about 70% of preschool fees, that we will cover that remaining 30% over the next 6 months, so parents won't have to pay any preschool fees over the next 6 months. And when it comes to childcare centres that are run by councils that didn't qualify for the JobKeeper program, that for the equivalent amount, we will cover that for around the 260 council-run childcare centres. That's about a cost of around $82 million to the taxpayers of our state, but that will be over the next 6 months to make sure that parents are given that support. I mean, the children, we've got a very difficult time of the next 6 months. The children are our future here in New South Wales, and we want to make sure our parents and their kids have the support over this time.
Yeah, relatively cheap given what we've seen being spent at a federal and state level over recent times. Now, there is a skills shortage when it comes to childcare. Many of them are visa holders. Many of them actually have been sacked. You'll know this, particularly in the state of New South Wales over recent weeks. Does that put the operation of some of these centres at risk when we finally come out of this haze?
Well, our packages, Laura, have all been focused on keeping people in jobs and business in business. That is our number one focus in the state, and our packages are also prepared in a way that are complementary to the federal government. So that's why you see today the support for council childcares. That was a gap in their investment that we can step up and run. We know that the federal government has provided significant support, cash payments to businesses. I know they can draw down on those funds for temporary visa holders, but where there are gaps, we will address them. This is not a perfect science. It's a moving, it's a watching brief in a moving position over the next 6 months. So where there are opportunities to provide extra support, we'll be doing that. We won't get it right every single time, but where we think we can step up and provide support, we will.
Well, every level of government seems to have stepped up, but what are the councils doing? I mean, we're all still paying full rates.
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think one of the pleasing aspects has been the Commonwealth government has provided significant support. All state governments are working together across political lines to make investments which can keep, as I said, business and people in jobs. The banks are doing their part, landlords and tenants as well. I think it is important that councils lift their game. We had a situation here in New South Wales recently where we copped a lot of political heat in relation to council amalgamations, and the argument to not proceed in many instances was that the councils said very strongly to the state government that they were fit for the future. So I think it's important that while we're investing record amounts, that the councils could be looking at areas such as waiving rates, as you say, for landlords to provide support for them as they pass on rent reductions to their tenants. It's becoming cliched, but we're all in this together, and I think the councils have been pretty quiet.
Yeah, land tax relief is something that you have been on the front foot over, not just for commercial landlords and tenants, but residential as well. What kind of relief will you see for that residential side, and when will that be seen?
Well, we're finalising our packages at both the residential and commercial side, and we should have something to announce in the next 48 hours. Obviously, we've been working very closely with our state. Well, I've been working very closely with the state treasurers, and this was a matter that came before National Cabinet to try and get a holistic response right across the board. And I think, to a degree, we will land that. Obviously, every state has different measures. What we're looking different systems in place, so it can be a challenge, but what we're looking at here is providing land tax relief at both the commercial and residential level for landlords who pass on rent reductions to their tenants. That will take place either a waiver, a deferral or a rebate based on whether or not that land tax has already been paid.
Okay, just finally before I let you go, public service pay rise. I don't want to get too, everyone's suffering, of course, and I don't want to get too political or petty about this, but is it fair that the public service get a pay rise in these times of austerity where everyone is suffering?
No, it's not fair, and you'd want to socially distance yourself from any politician who thinks that they should get a pay rise in this environment. We currently in New South Wales have a legislative requirement to pay public servants, including politicians, a 2.5% pay increase, which would kick in on July 1. So I'd be looking at legislating a freeze in that space. I mean, I don't think any public servant in this environment, when you've got people struggling to remain in work, to be getting a pay rise, or unless I'd say you're a frontline health worker at this time. So,
but you need Labor to support you in the Parliament, don't you?
Yeah, well, we'd have to legislate that pay freeze here in New South Wales. That's something that I'd intend on doing before June 30. But I think you'd be a pretty brave politician if you think you deserve a pay rise in this environment.